everybody, it is Romania Black, and we are on episode 15 of 86, and I can finally watch the OP now. And not be worried about skipping it, so that's exciting. That's a good thing. So yeah, we're here to see what fresh fun 86 brings us. Not any BL elements, that's for damn sure, because Eugene is gone. I've aired my grievances about Eugene's plotline being cut from us. I'm not going to do that anymore. The road is paved for you, Lena, to come right in. Nobody's fighting you for Shin except maybe Karina, and he don't even like her, so... Or does he? We don't know. So, yeah, I am ready to see what's going to happen now. I still have lots of questions, but I realize over the past few episodes, I feel like I've gotten defensive against the people who are defensive of this show and its choices. And I'm like, because something will be said in the Discord, and then someone will try to explain what that could possibly mean, and they're trying not to spoil, and then I'm like, but that doesn't make any sense. And so I realize that I get defensive of my own views of the show, and then much like you all do as well, I'm sure, of shows that you like. So I realize, you know what? If I notice a plot hole or an element where the show is not offering an explanation, or they're not really explaining their decisions, then I'm going to say it. I'm going to put it out there. But I am under the full expectation that the show can very well prove me wrong. It can very well answer those questions that I'm having, and I'm ready for the show to do that. I understand the show is doing unconventionally. They're posing a lot of questions. They're not offering you any clues to the answer of those questions. They're just like, here's a question, maybe we'll answer it. And some of those, I'm fine with that. I think that there can be some ambiguity. It's okay. There are some questions that we go back to episode 12, that whole them being spared is maybe, if my only exception is, and I know I'm hung up on it, but man, if that whole them being spared in episode 12 doesn't have an explanation and it just happened, it's like the biggest plot hole in anime history. And I'm like, what, why? And saying it's the biggest plot hole in anime history is an exaggeration. It's a hyperbole, but it's not far off. At least in the shows that I've watched, I'm like, wait a minute. But I'm reserving judgment. I'm trying to be open-minded. I'm doing my best. And it's okay. It's okay. I feel like I've watched another series, number 6, and number 6, the very ending of it has a lot of plot holes. It's got a lot of problems. But the thing about it was that they were trying to wrap up that anime when the manga wasn't completed. And if you go back and you read the manga, then it makes much more sense. It's a much more complete story. It is a better story. The anime just finished it up far too quickly without any means to elaborate on the ending because it didn't have it. And so that was its own problem. But I don't think this series has that thing because the novels are still ongoing. So who knows? But anyway, I am excited to see what happens. We've jumped like 6 months in the last episode. So now I want to see what everybody else is doing. Like what is Theo doing? What is Anju doing? What is Raiden doing? What is Karina doing? What have they been doing? How did they feel about getting split apart from Shin? Shin seems perfectly fine and just doesn't seem any different than his character's been this whole series. So I'm very curious. And are we going to go back to Lena? We haven't seen her in like 2 or 3 episodes. So are we going to go back to her, or are we going to at least get through this episode first? What about Kiryu? What about him, the guy that is the knight for Frederica? Are we going to get any more on him? Are we going to find out if Frederica's a kid or not, or if she's just eloquent, wise beyond her years for reasons? We don't know. So I want to give a big shout out first to our philanthropy tier over on Patreon. You all are amazing, and all the support on Patreon and YouTube is really, really appreciated. I especially love the support you all give me. I wouldn't be able to do this channel without it, so I'm very grateful. But the philanthropy tier, they go above and beyond each month to help support me, and I greatly appreciate that. So a special thanks to Alex Cornejo, to Anime Annie, to Anna, to Be Happy, to Dana, to Destiny Marie, to Danger Zone, as well as Eric, to Kiri, to Lyndon, to Loisiji, aka Frogman, to Matthew Palfinier, to Nameless Monster, to Murphew, as well as Trails, Shimoyama, Sunspots, and Translucent Men. Thank you all so much for your support. I greatly appreciate it. All of my love, and a special shout out to Mevelyn, who's been getting me the fan translated subtitles on the episodes. They've gone out of their way to like put this together for me, and they get them up to me ahead of time so I can record ahead. I am super appreciative of that, so thank you, Mevelyn. All of my love to all of you. So yeah, we're not going to waste any more time. I couldn't wait. I was like, I was looking at it. It's actually, I'm having more fun now because I'm like, I want to see what happens, and I want to break it down and tear it apart, and not to tear it down necessarily, but break it down and figure out what's going on, because there are a lot of questions. Somebody in one of the comments, they said that it doesn't do, again, some of the comments still have that air of like, this is a very special show, and I'm like, it's a show. But there was one comment that kind of stuck out to me where they were like, well, unlike what other shows do that is stereotypical, they just give you things and you'll have to go back and rewatch to get the full context. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'm going to hold you to it. I'm going to hold you to it, because some of these answers aren't being revealed. And I'm like, okay, so are we supposed to, we won't get, like, is it a long, slow burn? Okay, all right. Usually a show will give you crumbs, even if they're not flashbacks, so I don't know, but we'll find out. So we're not going to waste any more time. We're going to dive right into episode 15 of 86, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Well, that was a much better episode. There we go. And I say that because, yeah, there was a giant exposition scene with Frederica where it was just like exposition, but it was needed at this point. We needed something before we go into the final act. We need to get a little bit of backstory with Kiryu so that we can care about the stakes that are going to be happening. And so we finally get that, but we got character development. Yay! And we had some plot things that made sense. Yay! and I want to talk about them because I think that they're very good to note. And they do a good job. I really appreciate them. Yes. I feel like I'm very intrigued to know what Lena has been up to. We'll go back to that little last end of credit scene, but it's July 30th and we're talking about the Federacy operating base 13. So again, Shin was with the base 15, him and Eugene, and now he's moved to base 13, which is where him and Raiden are. So it's Raiden's base. There's a lot of crows used in this, so we're just gonna put the symbolism checklist so that people won't say I missed it. So the crows, there's usually 2 of them or a flock. I will say this, and it does kind of get a little frustrating for me with the symbolism in this series. The show very much just puts symbolism because it's one of its main elements, but it just puts symbolism grab this, yep, at the front and center portion of the episode. It can be a little frustrating for me, and I like going through the episode and analyzing things, but it almost becomes a point of like a scavenger hunt checklist of, did you find all the symbolism in the episode? Here it is right in front of you. Make sure to note about it and comment and point it out. Otherwise, someone will tell you you missed it. But it's like, I like symbolism that's not directly in your face, and that you can kind of like, I like symbolism that's just sort of, it's almost hidden. It's so subtle, it's not really noticeable. It's just like, it's there, and if you pick up on it, cool, but if you don't pick up on it, it's not, you may not realize it. With this series, like, all of the symbolism, the camera focuses on it, and it's like, are you getting this? Are you making note of the symbolism? Do you see the crows on the line? Do you see the moth in front of the window and how symbolic that is? We're gonna do a big close-up of it so that you can make sure and see it. And I'm like, I get it. You don't have to do that. That is the one thing. I like a lot of ambiguity with my symbolism. There's not a lot of ambiguity in this series with the symbolism. It's just, there it is. Do you get it? Did you mark it down? And so I feel like I have to do that. Otherwise, people are going to be like, did you notice the crows? And I'm like, yes. If you can't miss the symbolism of the series, it's right smack dab shoved in front of your face so that you don't miss it. It's like, oh God. But I appreciate it. I'm glad it has symbolism. A lot of shows don't, so I should just quit bitching about it. But in any case, we finally get to see Raiden and them. I'm glad. I do like the idea that Shin is, again, because Shin doesn't like filling out the reports. He just says the same thing. He doesn't care. And so I like that now he has something automated to do it for him so that he doesn't have to do it on his own. And I'm like, that's really funny. He just puts his boot up, has his name, has something do his signature for him, and that's it. And Raiden's like, you didn't read any of those, did you? I love Raiden. He's such a great character, right? It's just like Shin's like, no. And so he's like, it's rare for you to end up the same base. And he's like, we're all going to be together tomorrow. So I'm glad they at least talk about this. Apparently they don't care that they were split apart. They're just like, that was what happened. We do get some explanation of why they were split up in this episode, which I'm like, good, great. A lot of people were like, oh, just have faith, you'll get answers. And I'm like, glad. I'm glad to see that that is coming to fruition. And he's like, well, do you think they could treat us a little bit different? He's like, those things are prototypes after all. He's like, we took some heavy hits yesterday. Do you think it's about time for them to come? And they're talking about the Legion. It can be frustrating sometimes because Shin and Raiden, they like to talk to each other in their own little secret language. And what I mean by that is they know something the audience doesn't know. And when they talk to one another, they're talking as if they don't even care that the audience is there. They're just talking and being like, so you think this is going to happen? Oh, yeah, sure. And the audience is left wondering, what do you mean? What's happening? And the show just doesn't feel that it's necessary to explain to you what's happening, which is a choice. And that's fine. That is a perfectly fine decision. As long as there eventually gets to be some answers, I'm okay with that. And luckily, we do get those answers in this episode. We don't have to wait to find out something. And I think the whole thing is, if the show decides to keep you from finding out information, that's fine. But the information has to, if you're going to withhold information, that information, the reveal has to match the anticipation of the audience, right? And luckily, what they were withholding information about is the Legion coming and that Shin could sense it. So that's not really information worth withholding too long. So they just went ahead and came out and said it, which was a very smart decision. And he's like, no, they could honestly come at any time, right? And then we have the crows, and there's like a whole bunch of crows in the tower, the watchtower, symbols of death, symbols, bad omens, etc., etc. And then we get the OP. Nice. Okay. We do also get a shot of Kiryu in the OP, which is interestingly enough. And he has the Eye of the Legion, which is, he has the Eye of the Legion, and they're all around him, right? Which is coming out of him, which he has the blue eyes versus Shin's red eyes. Yep. Okay. When they're the two against one another. So cool. Nice. All right. So the large-scale Legion attack is coming in the oncoming days. And so we know, plot-wise, we'll bring this up here, that Legion is coming to attack. And it's a massive scale attack. And it's probably involving Kiryu. He's probably there just kind of like, this is like Ray 2.0, except now instead of Shin's brother leading the attack, it's the knight and protector of Frederica. So get our rematch there, right? Of course. And so I want to make note too that there is only one woman at this table. Inclusivity? Hell no, not here. I like that slowly, again, we start out this second half with the Federacy being all shiny and being like, look how great and progressive we are. And then the more we get into the series, it's like, no, they're not really as progressive as they say they are. They have a lot of problems as well. On the surface, they just look fine. Are they as bad as the Republic of San Magnolia? You could argue no, they are not. They're not enslaving people, literally like San Magnolia is. But they're not exactly as wholesome saints as they'd like you to think as well, or at least like Ernst portrays it, right? Not necessarily. There's a lot of prejudice that's still within them as well, just not quite to the fascist degree that San Magnolia is. But I want to make note, I'm looking around this table, the only pair of boobs I see, well, I see a lot of pair of boobs, but the only legit pair of boobs I see are Wenzel's. She's the only lady that is at the table, and it shows. And I don't know. It just, she's like, we need to reorganize our units to prepare for attack. And she's like, I'd like my men back. And you know what? Good for her. I don't blame her. She's the one that developed the pilot, I'm just going to call them fighters because I don't want to write out the German word. She developed the pilot fighters. She's the one that's organized it and has done the research and development. So I don't blame her for wanting them back. And plus, she seems to be the only one. She gives me again, we're talking about Attack on Titan. She gives me a McGath vibe to her where she wants to have the 86 at the table with her, talking about specs, talking about different strategies and things like that. Like, she wants them at the table to hear what they have to say. Even if she kind of discounts Shin, she does listen to him. She at least hears him out. So, but I instantly, every guy in the room is like, oh, she wants the 86 back. But, and honestly, they're not treating them any better. They're just using them because they're, using them as lackeys, as they say in the episode. And she's like, no, I want them back because I want them on the front lines with me. And the way that they try to answer her, like, all of them are so grumbly about her. Like, they all have the same exact face, except for the head guy with the eye patch, where he's like, go on. And he's like, the Reagan Leafs are still in the prototype stage. We have no idea whether they're capable of effectively operating on their own. So it's safest to keep them grouped with the Vanaganders, as we've been doing. So the way that he phrases it is saying, well, we don't really want them all together. They might go off on their own together, and they might go rogue and be a troop on their own that could be dangerous. So we need to separate them and have them help these other units for their own protection. But that's not how it comes across. It comes across whereas they're worried the 5 of them could cause some damage together and might go rogue from the Federacy with these newly developed piece of weaponry that they've made, that they've just given them. So they want to keep them under control, keep them under a watchful gaze, and separate them so they can't be together. That's how it comes across. And I'm like, well, that all makes sense now, why they were all separated last episode. But there's a little bit of mansplaining in this room where he's like, well, this is how we're going to be doing it. And she's like, I understand your position, but she's like, my squadron, the Nordlicht, is basically like Spearhead. We have the best kill count out of all the 8 corps. So she's like, we're the best group. We deserve to have the best firepower. And then he responds with, well, but you also have the most losses. But that's kind of just like the Spearhead unit. If you're in the most dangerous parts of the enemy territory, yeah, you're probably going to have the most losses because you're on the front lines. It goes without saying, right? And she's like, consider it a filtering process. I like that she's like, look, if we're on the front lines, yeah, the best of the best are here, but they're the best of the best. So what else you got, right? I just love Wenzel doesn't sit down. I love her character development in this episode. And this one guy's like, well, you're just taking advantage of the 86's experience. And I'm like, excuse me, sir. Did you put too much product in your hair this morning? Yeah, and he's like sending those poor kids right back into the war. And I'm like, but you're using them on your battle troops. So there is a lot of mansplaining gaslighting they try to do with her in this episode. And I'm like, I'm glad she stands her ground. She was giving me a lot of Lena vibes where she wasn't dealing with any of this bullshit coming from this guy and was like, no, actually, I'm a freaking scientist and a research and developer, and I've been on the front lines myself. I love we find that out about her. She's like, I know what I'm saying. Shut the frick up. I love Spider-Woman so much. I'm like, yes, tell it like it is. Because, yeah, it's like you're a merchant of death, desperate to get back your lost position. So, again, another tie to Lena is that she's a merchant of death. She kind of has a tie to Lena and a tie to Shin, where she's kind of like a Grim Reaper herself. but she's also like Lena, where she's trying to get back this position she lost. I'm assuming she was demoted for maybe similar reasons as Lena. But I love that she stands her ground. I love that she's like, screw you. I'm going to do what I want. I love she does not take any flack from him. She just goes over and snatches up. I love that she like listens to him and she's very quiet. She's very calm. She's like, yeah. She's like, well, my new Feldreher, my new MX2 Reagan Leaf, the things that I made that you're using. Funny you say that, sir. Let me walk in front of this projector, snatch this out. I have greater mobility than the Legion, so check this shit. I love it. She's like, if we're going to prepare for a large-scale offensive. And so I love she has this PowerPoint ready to go. She's like, the Reagan Leaf is more mobile than the Legion. It's a match tactically and in terms of firepower. Group tactics are insufficient to deal with a large-scale Legion offensive. A small group of elites will have to fight while outnumbered. The kills are among the highest of the entire 8th Corps, not just 177th Division. It is sufficient for individual operation. Yeah. And she just goes into the details about it. She's like, look, here's my Prezi. Suck it. We do not need to break with traditional doctrine should we not have a small elite unit capable of battling a much larger force. She's like, this is to protect the Federacy, so get your heads out your asses. Leave me alone. I've got the right idea here. Please allow me to consider using my Reagan Leafs. Thank you. And the squadron, and we can be put to proper use, General. She's like, let me do my freaking job. I'm like, yes, please, Spider-Woman. Love her. I love her, and I love she stands up for herself, right? Nice. So we cut to the very next day, and it's Bernholt talking about 2 casualties and it putting us under 20 men. Now, of course, I like the idea that we go past the radio tower, so there is a capability of having signal and communication to some extent. And I like that as Bernholt, he's like, man, we've had a lot of casualties and we're not getting any spare parts. And, you know, he's basically going through a list of everything that Shin has already had to deal with while being in the 86 during the Republic. So he's like, this is old hat to me. He's like, everything you're telling me is stuff I've had to deal with for the past how many years? He's like, not a problem. Not anything that's an issue, right? Our commander is the famous Spider-Woman, the weirdest girl even among the lab weirdos or the brass. I'm like, that girl may be weird, but she's like got the most sense out of that whole room. We're asking for more men, but they won't send anyone. She's like, I'm not used to not any. Yeah, Sheen's like, I'm used to this. And then again, there is this sense of pity where Bernholt says, you know, your life would have been easier if you joined one of the regular units. Like, why are you here? And Sheen's like, well, this is just what we're used to. We're used to being in the top unit, the most dangerous unit. That's just how our life is. It's fine. And Bernholt's like, okay. He's like, just don't get us killed with idiotic orders, even if you're a bratty little kid who never smiles or puts himself at the head of every charge, or a reaper who will drive you crazy. If you don't sympathize with us, it doesn't matter to me. Just don't do anything stupid that's going to get us killed. And so Sheen's character at this point, you can tell that Shin has never really thought of the future as a character. That's just not something he thinks about. He doesn't think that there's a future. He thinks he's going to die at any moment. So at what point, you know, for him, he's like, the moment you start thinking about the future, then you're not going to want to be on the battlefield because you're going to be instead want to be at that future. And that's going to distract you. It's going to cause you to possibly get killed. So he's like, I don't have the luxury of thinking about a future. That's never been something that I've had the privilege of getting. So of course he's not going to want to do it, right? But him seeing those body bags and seeing all these people that have died, you know, it is seeming to bring into perspective to him, you know, the cost of all this and how he's been spared while these others have died, and what is he supposed to do with that? And it's an interesting thing for him to comprehend, right? And I do like that we get these little moments with Shin, and then of course they're like, look ahead, and then we see Frederica, and of course Sheen's like, ugh, He's like, why are you in this shirt being indecent? Like, go put some clothes on, girl. And she's like, no. And she's just walking around with her teddy bear and runs into him. And then that's when she says, Kiri, I was combing my hair. So her thinking that he looks a lot like Kiryu. Now she says they're from the Nozin clan, but they're not directly related. So it kind of sounds like the Albas, like the Alban people. They all kind of look the same, but they're not directly related. They're just distantly related, which is still creepy and wouldn't get with somebody like that. It's Kentucky kissing cousins. But with Shin, she's like, oh, well, you guys are from the same clan, so you possibly have... Now, the question is, does Kiryu, did he have the same ability as the clan? Did he have the same ability as Shin and Frederica? Because they've established that Shin and Frederica, or at least so we think, they're not really related, but they have the same ability of their clan. Right? Maybe. So, interesting. But yeah, she sleepwalks through this. I like how he tosses her to Anju, and then Anju looks over and she's like, Theo, go get me a uniform. Like, I was like, Shin, what are you doing? I know Anju is maternal in a lot of ways to all of them, and I'm assuming he throws Frederica to her because she is the most parental of the group. But I like that she's just like, what the fudge do you want me to do with this kid? Theo, go get a uniform. Theo was really distracted this episode. I did notice that with his character. He didn't say 2 words. Other than Raiden and Shin and Karina, whose mind is somewhere else. We don't get a lot of Anju and Theo this episode. Anju we get the least out of. We don't hardly get anything from her. Theo seemed distracted this entire time. Like he was not paying attention during the debriefing. His mind seemed to be elsewhere, and maybe that's just one of his character traits, but he just seemed like he was distant. Karina seemed like she was, like, her mind was somewhere else. Like, Karina, she kept asking, like, did we learn that? Did we do this? She seems like she's suddenly aloof or not thinking clearly, or she's just so happy to see all of them. Like, something's up with her. She seems slightly distracted and distressed. Theo seems distracted. Raiden, of course, is worried about Shin, because of course Raiden is. And Anju we don't really get much with this episode, so... that was interesting. And then the idea... So then there's the idea of 86 as poor, helpless children is getting out of control, and you get sent more and more gifts. And he's like, please tell them to stop doing that. And he's like, well, I'd love to, but I need to follow the rules. Militaries are organizations filled with inefficient and illogical humans. That line was really weird. It felt like a very, like, did you know line? And... Shin I'm kind of with Shin when he looks back at him like, I'm like, are you being sarcastic, Bernhold? Is this your form of joking? Because he's like, please sign here. I feel like he's joking. And so he's like, as per the rules, please sign here. I feel like it was maybe a joke, but I'm like, Bernhold, your sense of humor is so weird. So again, talk about symbolism. The 86 are off at their own little table by themselves, and everybody else is sitting at the forefront by the buffet, talking amongst themselves, and the 86 are seated away from themselves, which is their own choice. It's not like, I mean, I don't think the other members of the military were like, you can't sit with us, and we're being all mean girls. I think it's their own self-choice to be away from all of them, which they feel like outsiders to begin with, so why not? But yeah, again, we have Frederica, who's embarrassed and realizes that she was walking around half asleep, and Anju's kind of laughing about it. But again, Theo looks really distracted. Theo looks like he's not thinking of anything. But what's frustrating is, I mean, in this moment, we don't get any inkling of why Theo and Karina are acting like this. It just happens, and we're supposed to, I guess, have faith that the show is going to tell us later why they're being so weird. I guess because Theo's aloof the entire time. He's just looking off in outer space. He's not thinking of anything. He looks like he's distracted, right? And of course, Raiden is trying to figure out what's up between them. And Anju's just being herself. Her and Raiden seem the most normal. And then Karina, she finds out and she's like, hey, we're all getting to see each other again. And that's when she finds out about Frederica walking around with that shirt. And then she's like, it's been a long time since we've all been together, right? And Karina goes, oh, yeah, that's right. And everybody's like, calm down. I'm like, why is Karina so anxious? Why is she acting so weird? We don't get an answer to that. And they're like, well, it won't be long that we will be together, though. We'll be starting cleanup again, recovering the remains of Allied and enemy weapons and the bodies as well. Say bodies too. And then we see Marcel, the mechanized units got hit hard. So we see Marcel, who's like really injured as well and taken off the battlefield. We might get sent on a patrol. Even though we know there's no point. We can't explain that though. So there's this idea that they can't really explain that. So the idea here that there's no use for an explanation because the Legion is going to launch this massive attack. They've seen, I'm assuming they're also talking about the weapons in the sky, and they're launching this massive attack that is bigger than the Federacy anticipates. And we'll talk about that in the debriefing, right? In the debriefing for that meeting there. So, which at the time I was like, you know, I kind of got onto Lena because she never told her uncle or any of them about the Legion and how big they were for reasons. She never said that to them. And I was like, why wouldn't you tell this to them? That seems like it'd be rather important. I'm more frustrated story-wise with Lena's side of things because Lena has nothing to lose telling them about it. It's like, if you tell them about the Legion not expiring after 2 years and about the massive attack coming, what do you have to lose? They're either going to take that information or throw it away, but you should at least say it, right? Here, we find out that there is something to lose because they don't want the Federacy knowing about Shin's ability. They don't want them knowing about Shin's ability to hear the Legion, which is interesting because we're going to talk about that here in a second. It's interesting that that's the thing. And so then, of course, Raiden looks over at Shin and at Frederica, who both have the ability to possibly... Now, Frederica's ability, as far as we know, is seeing people's past and present, but I'm thinking she can hear the voices too. I'm thinking that's part of it, right? She's clearly, I think, related to that clan as well, and Raiden kind of notices it. I also love her Sailor Moon-esque like notebook and everything about it. It's so cute. She's like, you guys have become used to being lackeys for the whole army over this last half a year. She's like, you guys are just being lackeys, but we're heading back to our base, and you guys need to get it together. I like that she has like the Sailor Moon stickers and everything. Again, we have the crow flying. We're back to the 177th command post. It was really cute seeing Shin lift her out of the truck. That was really cute. I liked that. That was probably my favorite little shot of the episode because Shin has become kind of like big brotherly towards her. And she says that she reminds him of his younger self, which I think is interesting. Because, yeah, his younger self, and is it him being, you know, bright-eyed and thinking of the future? Or does he think of himself like being like Rey? I don't know. So anyway, she talks about, we go to the debriefing here. And I like that she's like, okay, he's like, I've submitted my evaluation. I want to hear how you feel about the new equipment. And she's like, it's similar to the ones you use in the Republic. He's like, well, if you're asking about the Juggernauts, she's like, the Reagan Leafs. And he's like, it's basically the Juggernauts. And I like Raiden kind of laughs because, you know, you have these two hard-headed individuals going back and forth, right? Again, Karina and Theo, they look off this entire meeting, right? He's like, well, they're slightly better than the ones the Republic had. And she's like, really? And they're like, well, did she not know? And Theo and them kind of repeat the same thing we found out a few episodes ago. And she's like, well, why would you doubt the person who made them? And he's like, well, they're not bad. And he goes on and says, like, here's the good things about them. And she's like, I don't feel like this is a compliment. And Anju's like, he's not complimenting her, is he? And she's like, well, why did you agree to be an operator if you don't think that they're very well? And he's like, well, you recommended them to us. So she's like, well, I just wanted you to be test pilots. She's like, I'm opposed to child soldiers like you being sent in on the front lines. So it's easy to forget, I guess, that they're all like in their late teens. That none of them are actually 20 because she kind of reveals that she was a soldier 10 years ago. And now she's like in her late 20s. So she's like, I kind of relate to you all. I was, sent on the front lines as a kid. I saw a lot of death. And she touches Sheen's shoulder to be like, I know you're trying to be tough and act like this isn't affecting you, but it's probably affecting you and it's okay, right? You can be honest with me, which Sheen being honest with people is like the last thing he's going to do. She's like, when the war started 10 years ago, I was your age. So here's the thing, right? So here's the thing. When the war started 10 years ago, and it's been at least 8 years since it's gotten really out of hand, right? So with Frederica's character, if we're going by this right, Kiryu and her were around when the Empire was falling and Jihad had the Legion go AWOL on its own, right? But that was like 8 years ago. So Frederica has to be older than she looks. She has to be. There's no way that she's like a 10-year-old kid. There's no way. She has to be older than she looks. Even if she's like 16 or 17, she seemed like she was old enough back then to remember Kiryu. So I need a timeline. I need to know how old Frederica is, but the show is not willing to tell us this. But she has to be older than she looks, right? Has to be. And they said something earlier in the episode where she said young lady, and Anju said young lady, like talk to her. Frederica's older than she looks. She has to be. I feel it. And I do like this moment with the Spider-Woman where she kind of reveals her background as a soldier with her hand on Sheen's shoulder. And I like that Karina is like watching that hand on her shoulder like, are you trying to get on my man? Which she's not. She's trying to empathize with Sheen and make a connection. But she's saying, look, I lost a lot of friends because if my machine had been faster, I might have been able to save them. So she's like, that's why I wanted to do research and development and make these stronger weapons because I wanted to be able to protect people I cared about. So I like that development with her. She's like, we could have saved a lot more lives if we did it this way. And Sheen doesn't really argue with her. And she's like, but I appreciate your honest opinion. I'll make you give me a better one with the next round of upgrades. So she's like, I've got good news. She says, the United Kingdom of... Before I give you the message, the United Kingdom of, what does she say here? Of what is it called? The other day we were finally able to confirm the survival of Roa Gracia and the Alliance of Wald. So the UK of Roa Gracia and the Alliance of Wald are still around, the north and the south. Apparently wireless communication. And Karina's like, what countries are those? He's like, they're to the north and to the south. So there are some survivors north of the south. With Legion, they could confirm communication, which is good. They've built a defense line and maintained the area they could survive in. And Anju's like, well, we learned that in officer school. And she's like, did we? So yeah, Karina's not been paying much attention. That's interesting. But the other surrounding nations, as well as the Republic of San Magnolia to the west, are not answering our radio message. And they all kind of look at each other because they're all kind of thinking of Lena, being like, what's going on over there? What's happening with the other 86? What's happening with San Magnolia? We don't know. What has been going on these last 6 months? We don't know. And then she looks up and notices it. And so they're like, so is the message a bad one? And she says it is, unfortunately. I like that we have these two mechanics that are in there with them as well. There's a large-scale Legion attack coming soon. And the Western Theater Army will be strengthening its forces. So she has this whole giant ass like map of all the divisions, the 178th, the 175th, the 177th, headquarters, the Western Army. We have the artillery. We have like all of these different regiments. We have the 128th, 177th. Like there's a whole bunch of, we need a "you are here" button. But we know they're in the 177th, so they're basically going to be on the front lines. She's like, yeah, we're going to be strengthening our forces. So it looks like we have some that are surveillance, some that are the army, some that are like communications, etc. We're reorganizing the chain of command. The test unit is going to be placed under the 177th mechanized. Okay. And I will be taking command. So she's like, I want our squadron and these units to shine. So yeah, we see the Nordlicht. We see them like moving up with the 177th and the 128th. Okay, we can kind of see that on the map there where Nordlick is. And so, what is the size of the offensive? And she's like, oh, we could beat it back easily with our current forces. And she's like, you sent me a message about something similar, right? And that's when Raiden looks over like, you told her, what? And she's like, I read it with great interest, but the number of enemies you said were coming is just impossible. It goes beyond what our analysts are saying. She's like, you don't need to be that worried. The Federacy isn't like the Republic. We take recon and analysis seriously, and we prepare properly. And more than anything, we don't abandon those who fight alongside it. Yeah, but he just told you that it's funny that she says that. She's like, look, we're not like San Magnolia. We're not a bunch of idiots that don't take stuff seriously, but we're not taking you seriously. And I'm like, but why are you not taking him seriously? So I'm curious where she thought he got his information from. If they aren't suspicious that he has these abilities to see, and hear the Legion. I don't know where she thinks he got his intel from, but she was not taking him seriously. She's like, well, we kind of could, but no. And Shin's like, fine, I warned you. And then, of course, this is what I'm talking about. Like, the series, like, it just pans up on to the flagpole, and there's that black crow, and it, like, zooms in on it, being like, are you getting this symbolism? And you're like, yep. You're like, they're, the Federacy's screwed because they're not taking him seriously. It's a feast for crows, right? Mm-hmm. Also on the flag, noticing that there are 8 stars, which there are 8 corporations of the Federacy, and that it's these, like, black birds, like these, I don't think it's a crow, I think it's a griffith that's there as well. So, okay. So then we have Frederica, who goes to talk to Shin, and she's like, why are you walking in complete silence? And we see his room. It is very minimalist. It is very clean. It is very sterile, and it's very empty. And she's like, this doesn't feel lived in. You've been here a while and it doesn't feel lived in. He's like, well, there's no point. It just feels like he's not at home. He just has his stack of books with him that he reads, but he's not really wanting, it's again, symbolic with Shin that he doesn't really want to get settled in. He doesn't believe that he's going to have like a home to settle down in or a future to look forward to. He's making it very minimal so that when he dies, people don't have to clean up after him. Basically. He's like, they won't have to clean up much after I'm gone because I've already done it for him. Unlike Eugene, who left behind all the photos and stuff. And I could tell Shin was kind of upset when she said that she cleaned out his room. He's like, why did you do it? You're a kid. And she's like, there's nobody else around to do it, so I did it for them. I'm like, yeah. I kept waiting for her to throw out the picture and to bring it up, but she doesn't. I keep waiting for her to like leave the picture of him and Eugene so that he'll hang it up, but that hasn't happened yet. She just makes note that it's not good to leave a place empty. It won't feel like a home. But Shin doesn't want it to feel like a home, right? She's like, it's not a good idea to leave this empty. She's like, maybe that was okay in the Republic, but this isn't there. She's like, Eugene's room was filled with photos. And yeah, that's when Shin questions her cleaning it. And she's like, he says you shouldn't have talked to him. Then you wouldn't have had to see him die. Because I guess once she gets to know him, she would, be able to look into his past and present, right? But I like her answer to him saying, no, I don't think that. She's like, even if death will eventually tear you apart, it's better to meet someone than to have not met them. It's better to love and lost than to not have loved at all, right? And that's kind of her message to Shin. And she's like, look, you've been meeting all kinds of people and you take them with you. So who are you to say that? She's like, it's funny that you're the one telling me it. She's like, I take these pictures to remember them. You carved out their juggernauts to remember them by. Isn't that the exact same thing? Aren't you doing the same thing there? I love Shin. And he's like, well, you shouldn't get involved in someone else's death. And she's like, you are one to talk because you've gotten involved in everyone's death, right? And I feel like that's where Shin compares her to him being, he's like, oh, you want to get involved. And he's like, I feel like Shin, not that he regrets doing what he's done and been doing, but I feel like Shin understands the weight of what he's doing, and it's very taxing on him, and he doesn't want her to get caught up in the exact same thing, but she is, and she wants to, so he can't really do much about it. She's like, Mr. Kind and Gentle Reaper. Yeah, and again, we got to look right at the gun when we say it. And then we cut to Shin. Yeah. And then he's like, why did you come here? So I like that she wanted to come and apologize for this morning and talk about why she was confusing him with Kiryu. And she draws the picture to show how they are similar. You're not like twins, but you're very similar. My knight, Kiryu Nozen, was a member of the Nozen clan like you, but he wasn't a direct descendant of the clan, so he really wasn't related to you. So she's like, he kind of was, you know, not a direct descendant, just kind of distantly involved, but you guys look similar. But she says, when I saw him last, what does she say here? He was 4 years older than you. Okay, so he's 4 years older than Shin. So when I saw him last, he looked how you do now. Okay, so it's been probably 4 years. When I saw him last, he looked like you do now. I'm not a math person, so basically, but he should be in his 20s now, but he was like you when she last saw him. Okay. In a fortress filled with adults, he was the only one I could play with. So he wasn't an adult then. He was the only one close to her to play with, so I need a timeline, Frederica. You're not giving me a timeline. You're just making me think about it. He would get me flowers from the garden and comb my hair. And he was serious about everything and stubborn too. You guys would not get along at all. So meaning he's probably similar to Shin a lot, but also he seems a lot more gentle and kinder, openly. But then she shows how he looks. And it's similar to when you talk to someone, close your book. Follow the rules and regulations. He was all about that stuff. But you ignore all that, which would just make him madder. Yeah, which maybe is also explaining the monologue that he gives Shin when Shin saw him in episode 12. He was giving the monologue about protecting her no matter what, and he was following that rigid set of rules, right? Which would be perfect for a Legion robot, because following rules like a robot, you know, it's like, I can almost see it. And then she says it's her fault that he passed, and she draws them, only she gives herself the red eyes along with Shin, and she has the little, the cloak on the mantle. The Jihad Empire used the Legion to attack our neighbors. And then we have, yeah, you can see Shin's reflection in the mirror behind her. But after that, the people rebelled. And then we have, like, the red light. Of course, the red light that's kind of like that of the Legion, of Fido, all of that in the window, just blinking for symbolic reasons. And the Imperial family was chased to a border fortress. It feels very much like Anastasia. It feels very much like the people revolting against the Romanovs. And so the Romanovs were going to escape, except that didn't end well for them at all. And it seems to have not ended well for her at all either. And Ernst, I feel like she was a child at the time and young enough that Ernst took pity on her and was like, oh, well, we'll spare her. She's a child. She wasn't involved in all this. But I have a feeling the older members of the royal family did not survive the rebellion. The Legion were supposed to protect us in our soldiers' stead. But then she says, I don't really know what happened. She's like, they were supposed to protect us, but that didn't end up happening. Instead, what does she say there? The Legion weren't built to fight alongside humans, and we had to use human defenders at the fortress. So it didn't work out. For some reason, the Legion didn't do what they wanted them to do, and instead they had to have people protect them, and a lot of people ended up dying, is what it sounds like. Kiryu and Kyria had to fight to protect me against the rebelling people. And he's like, you mean the current army? And she's like, yes, he killed many of them. And eventually he went insane. So that's fun. The idea that eventually he just went mad protecting her. He lost his family, everyone he knew. The home he grew up in was enemy territory, which sounds very similar to Shin, right? It sounds a lot like Shin, where he lost his family, his home became enemy territory, and he was just fighting to protect her, just like Shin was just living to fight to protect his fallen comrades. And the idea of everything falling one after another, like tines falling out of a comb, the comb being used for her hair, tying back to that. It sounds a lot like Shin, you know, losing members of the 86 over and over again and just kind of going insane, collecting all of the different pieces of their juggernaut. It sounds a lot like what happened with Kyria, where he just slowly lost everything around him and clung and she says, I think he lost too much. And she's like, he only clung to me. It sounds a lot like Shin, but I think a big difference was it sounds like maybe Kyria saw a future and it involving Frederica, whereas Shin does not see a future. So maybe he can keep his sanity because he doesn't have any future that he's grasping onto that he could potentially lose. Or maybe that's his theorizing for himself and that's what keeps him sane. But yeah, she's like, he lost too much. Eventually fighting for my sake was all he had. And that's kind of, you know, Shin's whole thing. Shin's just been fighting to spare the rest of the 86. And she's like, that's kind of how he was for me. He would smile at me while literally killing a Federacy soldier under his boot. And with the blood-stained, you know, weapon by his side, he'd have a bright and calm look on his face. And I was so scared. And then we see her like blurring the edges of him from the pencil. Yeah. And then he gives her the coffee. I'm like, you give this little kid a cup of coffee. It's fun. And eventually the fortress fell and the Federacy caught us. I was lucky that Ernst was there to inspire his men to spare her, right? Thanks to him, the only thing that was shown to the crowd as proof of my death was the mantle that I wore. And that's when Shin thinks back to seeing that image. It was the mantle. It showed like her cape with all of the blood on it and everything as proof that she died. So they basically faked her death. So as far as we know, she knows that she's the last empress. And Ernst knows, and Theresa knows, but the other people there at the base do not know she's the last empress. All they know is that she's there as an old custom tradition goddess of victory. That's all they know. Which you'd think they'd question it, but no, I guess not. Maybe they know. I guess they don't know, because if they knew she was the last empress, I don't think they'd want to keep her alive. But who knows? And then we see, yeah. And he sees back there, she looks like a little kid when he like lifts her up. So but that's the image that's from Kyria's memories, is of him lifting her up. So so how old was she then? That's a question. But Kyria saw it. And yeah, and so we see him, okay, and did he think that she was dead? He saw it. Okay. And at that moment, the Legion were wandering the battlefield and looking for things that they could recycle. Oh, the way that that's said, things that you can recycle, that's very clinical and very creepy. They're basically looking for brains, right? And Kyria stood there, not moving, and he did not run. I turned him into that monster. So he basically thought that she was dead. And he thought she was dead, or thought she was going to be taken away from him, and he went crazy and let Legion take him. And that's how he is now. Interesting. Okay. Creepy. But again, the symbolism, we just have to show you that moth and that spider web right front and center. The empire fell and many died. Yep. Okay. And then if you go fight them, Kyria will be there too on the front lines. She's like, that's why I'm going. When that happens, she's like, you don't understand. She's like, if it gets dangerous, she's like, don't fight, just run. And she's like, yeah, she's like, I've forgotten how easily people die. And I'm like, oh girl, these 5 aren't probably going to die. No matter how much you want them to have a future. You were right a moment ago. She's like, I don't want the people I've met to die. So saving Kyria isn't worth you or the other's death. She's like, look, I know. She's like, I know you had to have closure with your brother, so you're ready to go face death to go face him because you needed that closure. She's like, you don't have to save Kyria. He's already gone. You don't have to do that. Your lives aren't worth going out to the battlefield and having that happen. She's like, you can just run away. Stop. You don't have to have death wishes. She's like, I know you all now. I don't want you to die like he did. Right? You all have a future, and that cannot be taken away from you. She's like, the people that have died, they don't have futures anymore. But you do, so don't treat that so lightly. And that's when Shin, he doesn't really think about the future, and she kind of chides him for it. She's like, really? You've never thought about it? She's like, you should go where you want to go on your next leave. And do what you want to do someday. Anything like that will do. And that's when he thinks of both Eugene, I'm sure, but also Lena. Because Lena told him the same thing. She's like, you should be able to go on and, do what you got to do. Go on leave. Yeah, I like that they're all thinking of Lena and wondering where she is. I really hope that she's been planning this offensive and that she shows up during the Legion attack. I hope that she does something to lead some form of attack against the Legion, even if she comes by herself, I hope that ends up happening, that she ends up on the battlefield. I really want Lena on the battlefield for this season. That damn OP, it shows them looking at each other, so if that doesn't happen, not going to be a happy camper. I'm like, I want Lena to have been planning something like she was planning with the mortar and to show up. I don't know how she'll get there. I don't know how she can do communications because she doesn't know where they're at. She has no clue that they're even still alive. So I don't know how that's going to be possible, but I want her to be a Deus Ex Machina. Lena somehow to be that. I don't know how it's possible, but I'm going to cross my fingers that the show gives us something like that. I also like that Frederica calls Shin boring because he kind of is. He kind of is. I like Shin as a character, don't get me wrong, but he's kind of, I've been thinking about that this series. I want his character to grow because he's been pretty plateaued from his character doesn't really, we got little glimpses of it here where he was looking at the bodies out the window and I'm like, okay, are you thinking about this? Are you thinking about your future? But Shin has been kind of one note most of the season, most of the series, where we got a lot up front about Shin, a lot of mystery with him. We got a lot about him. The best stuff with Shin so far has been him and his brother. But ever since his brothers left, it's been kind of just one note. And I want Shin's character to grow, but he doesn't reveal anything new to us that we don't already know. Like a lot of the stuff him and Raiden talk about, Raiden just kind of reinforces what we already know about Shin. Like Lena's character has grown. She has changed over the course of the season, what we've seen in the first core with her. And I like that, but Shin's character's kind of plateaued. He's not changed any. What we know now about Shin is what we've already known since episode 3. So I'll be curious to see what we get out of his character, if we get more vulnerability, if we get more development, if we get him actually thinking about the future. Because right now he's still in that same spot. And she's like, you're boring. And I'm like, a little. He kind of is. I'm like, he's a cool character. I like his character, but he is kind of boring. I'm like, come on. I'm like, at least Raiden has some layers with him that make his character more interesting. Right? And she's like, that person must have been disappointed with you. And I'm like, oh girl, nah, she's all into the tall, dark, and mysterious. She's into him. Which honestly, like, if we got more of him like talking about the books that he read, I feel like the most character development we got with Shin was also with him talking with Lena. And he hasn't been able to talk with Lena since like episode 10. So for the last 5 episodes, his character hasn't really said much of anything or developed. And I want more of that. So I'm like, let him talk to Lena, please. Because he's like, oh, would she be disappointed in you? And him looking at the moon and saying, maybe so. I'm like, no, she wasn't disappointed in you. Not really. Raiden's face is me. Raiden's face is me being like, really, bitch? In that very next scene where she sees like Shin carrying her, and then he like tosses her to Raiden, and Raiden goes and gets Karina to take her back to her room, and then Raiden's like, you've really gotten attached to her, and Shin's like, well, she reminds me of the old me and how I used to be. And like, I don't know about that. Raiden's like, I don't know. And then, yeah, he's like, come pick up the princess. And he's like, wait a minute, I want to talk to you. So then, of course, we get the two crows on the line. We only end up with one at the end of the episode. And that's when Raiden's like, you gave them a warning. And he's like, well, I figured I might as well try. And he says, I told you when we came here to keep the power of yours a secret. Yes. And that's when he says that you haven't forgotten what they called you when they found out you could hear those voices, Reaper. The Federacy aren't the saints that they think that they are. That, yes. So that is the thing. The Federacy believing that they're these good people, but still having some inner prejudices that are similar to the Republic. Yeah, it's very much the same thing, right? And I'm glad that kind of that veneer has been stripped off, at least to where the characters kind of understand it. But yeah, so I like the fact that Raiden is pointing out, he's like, they very well, if they find out that you can hear these voices of the Legion, they could take your brain just as easily as San Magnolia wanted to take your brain back when we were there. Like, they very well could decide to pick you apart like some kind of guinea pig. And he's like, I don't want that to happen to you. He's like, even here, we're not treated as equals. So it isn't just the Legion that likes to take out people's brains. If you want to be a guinea pig, that's up to you. But I don't want to end up a hostage to encourage you. Yeah, Raiden's like, you know what? If you want to become a guinea pig and let them know all this, fine. But I don't want to be involved in it. And I don't want to get caught up in some kind of hostage situation of power between you and them. No, don't want to be a part of that. And I don't blame Raiden for saying. I'm glad he says that. I'm glad he had that conversation with him. And then he's like, well, it's up to them if they want to believe it. And he's like, but are you okay? Like, are you okay with this? You're not thinking of anything you shouldn't be, right? He's like, are you going to do anything stupid? I like that Raiden's like, remember when you left us back in episode 11 and did something really dumb? Are you going to do that again? He's like, what are you thinking of? He's like, come on now. He's like, what Ernst said bothering you about the future? And he's like, I don't know. And he's like, what about you? And Raiden's like, well, it'll all work out and we'll figure it out in the end. He's like, the future can't be as hard as anything we've dealt with, right? And I like that that's when he's like, it was about this time of day that she'd call us, wasn't it? I love that. Again, Raiden's character gets a lot of development of all of them. And I like that he points this out. I really like this conversation he has with Shin. It's very needed. And it points out that they're all kind of thinking of Lena in their own ways. They miss her. Even though they don't say it, it's very clear that they miss her. Maybe not Karina, but, and I like that Raiden kind of seems to understand that Lena brought out the best in Shin from what he could tell. And so he's like, you know, I feel like he kind of almost wishes she were here to help make him more communicative. And he's like, what do you think she's doing? And he just shrugs. And then Raiden's like, ugh. And then there's just the one crow under the moonlight. So then we actually find out about what Lena's been doing. We see the two flowers that are there. So it's possible that two people have just passed. And we cut to her. She has like everything mapped out. She has like all of these different notes on there. There are things scribbled. She's like got all these notes, lots of books with even more like post-it notes in them. And then we see the bulletin board when she looks over to it. And right now we see the 5 that are still separated. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and there's 9. So there's 9 of that group left in the 6 months, right? I'm assuming Cyclops is still one of them, but we don't know. And then, yeah, and she's writing down, and we see the chocolates that are there, like from Ray, and the gold and silver wrappers, and she keeps writing. And then we have the next episode previewed. So I am very excited. I want to see more about what Lena's been up to, but they're probably keeping that a mystery for reasons. But I'm also very curious about Kyria and seeing him with the Legion, if we're going to get more with Kyria, if we're going to get more from Frederica about her time as Empress, about her relationship with Kyria. I wish we knew how old she was, but that's a mystery, right? We'll find out eventually. So I really liked this episode. This episode was really good. I really liked the conversation between Raiden and Shin. I really liked Wetzel like standing up for herself. I really liked the conversation between Shin and Frederica as well. So Shin has so many people in his corner. He just doesn't know what to do with it. So I'm also curious for y'all's comments down below. At this point, I'm just like, I told the mods, I was like, I'm only going to answer comments if I want to. If any of them sound like they're going to go that route of trying to correct or be having that cloud of condescension, then I'll just ignore those. But if people are genuinely wanting to talk about the show and not be spoilery, I'm all about that as well. So, like I said, if I see a comment that might be kind of spoilery, I think I'll double check it with the mods. But otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more 86. Bye!